Hello, you beautiful people. Today I wanted to talk about some fantasy basketball injury updates and what some potential returns could mean for your team as well. So before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to for NBA and fantasy content. I try to upload 6 times a week, and let me know what injury you guys think is going to have the biggest impact on fantasy in the comments below. So with that being said, let's jump right into the video. So you already know we start with the player in the thumbnail, and that's going to be KarlAnthony Towns. So he was initially listed as questionable for today's game after being out with the Rona, but they just changed that to out, so he's going to remain out for a few more games. And what his return means for the Timberwolves in terms of their fantasy value, the main person that's going to have an impact on these numbers is Naz Reid. I mean, this pretty much just turns him into a droppable player because he's just not going to be able to do much now that Towns is fully healthy again. And I mean, it also kind of bites into Jared Vanderbilt's value. He has been an under-the-radar streaming option these past weeks. And I feel like Towns' return also makes him fall down to the waivers again. So in terms of the other players on the Timberwolves, I mean, I think it might help D'Lo just because he has a better pick and roll partner, but still I don't see D'Lo's value really increasing that much. Malik Beasley, who knows with him, man, and like I said, dude thinks he's Michael Jordan, so he's just going to shoot every time he gets the ball anyway. It definitely takes a few more shots away from him, so his value might be hurt by Towns' return. Anthony Edwards just hasn't been playing good, regardless if Towns is there or not. And yeah, I think that sums up most of the impact Towns' return will have on the Wolves, so I'd wager that you should probably try to trade Naz Reid or Vanderbilt while you can, or just drop them now, because Towns is going to be back within the next game or so you might as well try to pick up someone else who's going to be a more long-term option. And yeah, with that being said, let's just move on to the next player. So the next player I want to talk about is going to be CJ McCollum, and as it always is with the Trailblazers, they're just getting really unlucky with injuries. I mean, first Nurkic, Zach Collins is out, and now CJ is going to be out for a long time. So his return date hasn't been set yet. They just said they're going to wait at least 4 weeks before they reevaluate him, which really doesn't provide much of concrete detail on when he's going to be back at all, but we can safely assume it's not going to be for a while. And yeah, with him being out, I think the main beneficiary is Gary Trent Jr., who's already been putting up some decent games, so I definitely keep an eye on him if you have a streaming spot. Other than that, I mean, Kanter's just going to keep seeing minutes as long as Nurkic is hurt, and we're going to talk about that later in the video. And I mean, maybe you could make a case for Covington or Melo, but at this point I don't really trust either of them, and I think Gary Trent's your best option if you're looking for a streaming spot on the Blazers now that CJ's out. So yeah, obviously it's going to hurt Gary Trent's value when CJ gets back, but given as we don't know when that's going to be, I feel like it's a good time to pick up Gary Trent if you have a streaming spot and you're feeling like taking a risk on him. And over the past 3 games as a starter, he has been averaging over 38 minutes a game, so with that kind of time, it just gives him a great opportunity to put up fantasy numbers. And yeah, with that being said, let's just move on to the next player. So the next player I want to talk about is actually Marcus Smart. So if you saw, he just suffered that scary looking injury last game. Luckily it wasn't too bad, and he's only going to be out for 2 to 3 weeks with a strained left calf. But in the wake of that injury, I don't really know if it opens up any more fantasy players like as viable options, because like obviously it's going to increase Tatum, Brown, and Kemba's numbers, which I just made a video on in my buy low player, so this definitely helps the case for Kemba now that Smart's going to be out for a bit. And I mean, I guess it could raise the value of like Jeff Teague. I mean, we don't really have any backup guards that are like good options at the moment now that, I mean, Peyton Pritchard's also out for a bit, so that definitely doesn't make him an option. And yeah, I mean, Carson Edwards and Tremont Waters just aren't there yet. Same with Jeff Teague. I mean, I don't think he's going to be a viable fantasy option, so I really think the only people that Smart's injury is going to impact is mainly like the starting lineup, and then a few more minutes for Teague, but not enough to make him a viable fantasy player. So yeah, I think while he is going to be out, so yeah, the only player that could potentially be on waivers that I could see benefiting from this would be Daniel Tice, which I mean isn't the greatest fantasy option, but like if you have a free streaming spot, I'd wait a few games and see how Tice does without Smart. If he's putting up good numbers, then you might as well pick him up for a few games, but just be aware that in 2 to 3 weeks when Smart gets back, he's going to come back down to earth. And yeah, I think with that being said, let's just move on to the next player. So our third update is actually about someone that I just made a video on, which is kind of unfortunate timing, but it's about Aaron Gordon, and he just got diagnosed with a severe left ankle sprain, and he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. So this is a really devastating injury to the Magic, who like just can't seem to catch a break with injuries. I mean, we had Fultz, Isaac, Al-Farouq Aminu's out, but like now Gordon as well, man. Like the Orlando Magic have a curse on him or something, man. I don't really know what's going on there, but with Gordon being out, definitely gives increased run to Vucevic and Fournier. They're now like team's top 2 scorers by far. I mean, they always had Gordon as like a tertiary option, but now it's really just those two. And for waiver players, I feel like if you could pick up Terrence Ross or Cole Anthony, I'd definitely look into it over these next few games just because like their value might increase. So yeah, like I said with the other players, just keep an eye on these guys for the next few games, and then if they seem to be doing well, I'd definitely look into Terrence Ross or Cole Anthony if you have a free streaming spot. So the next one's actually going to be a bit of a 2-for-1, and it's going to be Jonas ValanCheaper and Jaren Jackson Jr. just because they're both out and have looming return dates. So with Jonas, it's a bit sooner. He's just out because of health and safety protocols, so who really knows when he'll be back? That stuff's a bit weird, but Jaren Jackson Jr., they just had an update that said they think he's going to be out for another month, which is kind of shocking because the reports were that he was going to be coming back sooner than that. That just shows you can't really trust the reports. But anyway, when Valanciunas gets back and Jaren Jackson, if we look at the long term, I feel like this return's kind of impacting like the entire roster of the Grizzlies, honestly, in terms of their fantasy value. I mean, pretty much makes Brandon Clark, Kyle Anderson droppable players at that point. So that's why I made a video on Brandon Clark about selling him high, and I think this just helps that point because like if Jonas and Jaren Jackson come back, his numbers are just going to be like waiver wire numbers. You could just get that anywhere else, and it kind of has a profound impact on like all of their roster just because like they're two of their main starters, and that just kind of has a effect on like everyone's fantasy numbers on their team. So yeah, their return kind of hurts the Grizzlies' fantasy numbers for other players more than it helps, but if you have one of them, I mean, you're going to be pretty happy about this news. So yeah, let's just move on to the next player. So second to last, we actually have another Trailblazer, and it's going to be Yusef Nurkic, and he underwent successful surgery to repair a fracture in his right wrist on Tuesday, and he's going to be reevaluated in 6 weeks, and what that means for his fantasy value is that it's pretty much negligible. I mean, just being reevaluated in 6 weeks isn't a good sign because if he is returned to play, he's not going to be back until like probably one of the last weeks of the season. So like the only way I'd keep Nurkic on your roster is if you have like 3 IR spots and you can just afford to stash him there and just wait for like the final season like of the playoffs in your fantasy league. But other than that, I mean, there's not really any point in keeping Nurkic on a roster at this point, in my opinion. As well, there is no concrete date. It really just is a bad bet that he's going to be back in time to contribute meaningfully in fantasy, if not for like the last week. And even then, he's not going to be putting up great numbers because he will have just gone the whole season without playing. And obviously, the main beneficiary of Nurkic being hurt has been Enes Kanter, and I feel like he's just going to keep that production up because Portland is just so weak at the center spot right now in terms of its depth that it really just has to rely on Kanter, and he's putting up pretty good fantasy numbers, so I think he's a good player to stream if he's on your waiver wire, and I think that's going to continue for like the entirety of the season because honestly, the Blazers just don't have anyone else. So with that being said, let's move on to the last player. So you already know if you made it this far into the video, you're a real one, and drop a free Beal in the comments just because we got to get my man Bradley Beal out of Washington, like for real. I feel so bad for him watching him every game dropping 50 and they're still taking L's. So with that being said, the player I wanted to talk about last is going to be Caris LeVert, and this doesn't have any real fantasy implications. I just wanted to talk about him because I'm really glad he's okay. Side note, I saw this guy play live against the Celtics. It was the very last game before Rona shut everything down last season, and he dropped 51. It was just absolutely insane to witness. But anyway, this doesn't really hurt anyone on the Pacers because he hasn't played with them yet. Also doesn't really help anyone. I don't know how long it's going to take him to recover from this. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I feel like it's going to be a substantial amount of time. So if he is on your team, like Nurkic, if you have like a lot of IR spots, feel free to stash him there. But if you don't, I don't think you're going to be hurt too much if you drop him for someone that's really playing well on the waivers. And yeah, I think that's going to conclude the video. As always, I want to thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you all have a great day.